Since launch, a lot of people have been saying Assassin's Creed Valhalla is horrible. A majority of the dislike comes from the comparison to the old games in the franchise that are loved by the longtime fans. It's been 4 years since I've played the game, so it felt right to give it another chance to see if my opinion has changed, or is it still a mockery of the franchise I know and love. As we all know, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is not the first game in the series. The world of Assassins vs Templars has existed for almost 2 decades. Over this time, millions of passionate fans have grown to love the franchise. So just like any other installment, Assassin's Creed Valhalla needed to correctly balance staying true to the world while creating changes for the new game. Any logical person knows a franchise like Assassin's Creed needs to make some changes. Even Assassin's Creed 2, which is generally loved, made some changes from the first game. But the same goes for changing too much. There's a reason the game is titled Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It's because Assassin's Creed is an already popular and recognizable IP with millions of fans. Ubisoft knows a vast majority of players will buy the game simply because of the name Assassin's Creed in the title. So if you're going to use the Assassin's Creed title, you owe it to the players who built your franchise to stay as loyal as possible. Now, when I look at what fans are saying online, a topic most discussed is the game not being a true Assassin's Creed game. Do I blame fans for being upset with Ubisoft for no longer feeling like this is the same franchise? No, I don't. Because I do believe the reason a lot of these changes were made are bad reasons. While I previously said changes are needed, they also need to be made with good intentions. An example of this is Assassin's Creed Black Flag. It was the first game in the series to have fast travel from synchronization points. While I'm sure there are some purists who still don't like fast travel, players welcomed the change as it was a quality of life upgrade to enhance the player's experience. But unfortunately, it's clear with some of the decisions that they do not have the player's best interests at heart. That being said, I find a lot of the debates online miss the point of what makes a game Assassin's Creed. Since it's such a widely debated topic on what it means to be an Assassin's Creed game, I find it important to talk about the 10 commandments of Assassin's Creed. Because there is a difference between a standalone game and a game that is part of a bigger story. So a little bit of context, these are rules created by Ubisoft after the release of Assassin's Creed 2. With a new game dropping every year and expanding to other sources of media, Ubisoft wanted to make sure every development team could work on separate projects while keeping narrative and gameplay consistencies. So they created 10 rules with a few extra do's and don'ts that clarify exactly what makes an Assassin's Creed game. Now, of course, these can be somewhat subjective, but I do believe this is the most objective way to look at this debate. If you are interested to listen to the talk yourself, I'll try to link it in the description. If not, just comment and I will then update it in the description. The first and third commandment of the franchise talk about the story between Assassins and Templars. While I do think Valhalla tells the story of the secret war between Assassins and Templars, I don't see the Assassins and Templars as the foundation of the story past and present. I'd argue the foundation of the story is Ivor's quest into making allies in England. Based off of how much time in the main story is centered around the Order plot versus how much time is spent making alliances, I'd also argue the selling point of the game is on the Viking fantasy and not the Assassin versus Templar feud. For that reason, I'd consider Commandment 3 to be bent, not broken, as the feud is still a part of the main story. But it very much feels like an afterthought in the creation of the game. Commandment number 7 states that Assassin's Creed is based on technology, nothing is magical. I'd say this one is a no-brainer. We have a mythical city of Asgard, we fight mythical wolves at multiple points, there are weapons that can instantly catch fire or gain poison. I know there are arguments to be made that this is a simulation, maybe that's not what really happened, but you can't say that was Ubisoft's idea when making the game. It's a justification for the supernatural moments in the game, but it definitely wasn't the plan. The 10th commandment states that the games can bend historical accuracy but cannot create a new chronia, which in essence means creating an alternate universe with an alternate history. So I need to preface this by saying I am in no way an expert on history. I don't know every detail about the Dark Ages, but I have done extensive research online, read posts from people who do study history, and from my research, Assassin's Creed Valhalla just plainly ignores historical accuracy. The historians pointed out that the staff churches that are included wouldn't be dated for a few centuries after the time in which Valhalla takes place. With the clothing, they styled the characters in layers of fur and leather, but from the historical research, I found leather was expensive and they would have opted for more chainmail options on their armor, similar to those of the enemies in the game. Now, of course, the game is not 100% inaccurate, but historians believe that with the number of inaccuracies in the game, it cannot paint a picture of England in the 9th century. More so, it's the pop culture version of the medieval world seen in popular shows like Vikings. In my eyes, that's a failure on the 10th commandment because frankly, if you add architecture from 3 centuries in the future, you're not even trying to be accurate. Ubisoft has so many smart people in these jobs, I can't imagine a world where nobody pointed out the obvious flaws with the history. Beyond the 10 commandments are the unchangeable elements of the IP. If these are not present, then the IP shifts. That's the rule. The most notable of the elements is the fantasy of being an assassin. Does Valhalla deliver on this fantasy? Well, let's take out the hidden blade randomly gifted to us and take off white robes of 2 characters who frankly don't do much Assassin's Creed stuff anyways. And of course take off the title Assassin's Creed. Would you have the feeling of being an assassin? Would you even be able to tell this game is connected to other entries? I don't believe so. 80% of the game is spent as a Viking building alliances for the clan's move to England. And to me, that means the fantasy of being an assassin is missing. Now look, I don't believe every game has to follow these commandments without even the smallest deviation. But I do feel like ignoring the rules is a major mistake Ubisoft made when developing the game. That being said, I know there are fans who are new to the franchise, so I hope this part helps keep perspective of how I will be looking at the game. Going forward, I will be analyzing the game as its own entry while also keeping consideration of it being part of a bigger story. So with that being said, let's finally discuss Assassin's Creed Valhalla. While Assassin's Creed Valhalla does try and bring in elements the franchise is known for with social stealth and hidden blade, it's painfully obvious from the beginning that Valhalla used these tools to appease the older fans of the franchise while shifting their focus onto the Viking Simulator. Unfortunately, Ubisoft is not able to strike the correct balance in Valhalla. Because of the lack of identity, the game lacks a sense of direction in regards to building out the gameplay systems. Just like with any Assassin's Creed game, the gameplay consists of 3 elements: stealth, parkour, and combat. The parkour is some of the worst we've ever had. Not that I would even call it parkour anymore. Running from rooftop to rooftop is in the past. The parkour in Valhalla mostly consists of climbing large mountains and jumping off to little fall damage. Ivor is clunky and slow. Exactly what an assassin should be, am I right? I find myself avoiding parkour scenarios as much as possible to save myself from the struggle. Stealth is still in the game as well, although the game tries to get you to not use it as much as possible. I will say, just as a caveat, the ability to turn on one-shot stealth in the settings might be my favorite part of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Granted, this should always have been in the game. There should never be a time where I sneak up on someone with a hidden blade and they take it like a champ and stand back up. Even if you don't want to turn on the one-shot assassination in the settings, you can still unlock an ability that gives you a meter to one-shot assassinate a target if you time it correctly. I prefer to use the guaranteed assassination as that is how assassinations should work, but the middle ground is a good place for players who enjoy more of a challenge. But as a Viking Simulator, the most important part of the gameplay lies in the combat. Unfortunately, I don't find Assassin's Creed Valhalla does that particularly well either. At best, the combat can be considered mediocre. The animations are flat, the fights are clunky as you parry and dodge the incoming attacks. As a Viking, I expected to feel stronger, more aggressive, but the more I played the game, the more the combat felt lifeless. Ivor had no power behind the swings. It's as if I was swinging pool noodles instead of weapons. I would expect a game that is centered around being a Viking and invading England to excel at combat most of all, but I found the gameplay mechanics to be underwhelming. It felt as if the mechanics were a tick off of a box rather than something passionately created for this project. One of the most important parts of any Assassin's Creed title is the time period. It can almost make or break a game by itself because every other aspect of the game is determined by the time period of the game. The narrative, the gameplay, and even the characters. So it's important the game takes place in a time that allows all of these parts of the game to thrive. Assassin's Creed Valhalla takes place in the Dark Ages around 875 AD. At the time, England was being ransacked by Vikings coming to their land, pillaging supplies, and being ruthless to everyone in their path. And from a visual perspective, there are beautiful moments. We have the northern lights flooding the sky, we have moments of snow dropping over the settlements. From a pure visual standpoint, the game is immensely detailed. So it sucks when the majority of the game is spent traveling through miles of trees and dull farmland. While recent titles have had camps or other ways to keep the player busy with the large space between cities, Valhalla is a vast open world with nothing to fill the space. And so I was quite upset when I would finally get to a city to find out it's another copy and paste with no real variety. This is why I find the one city style or a few cities easier to design because every detail of the map is perfectly placed. Whereas when you have a large number of cities, you end up using a lot of the same designs for all of them anyways. There are no landmarks that are memorable, it all feels the same. The cities are empty, there's no action taking place, which takes away any immersion you may have in the game. Now look, I know this is supposed to be historically accurate to the time period in England, but what I am saying is that it makes for a subpar setting. At no time did I stop and say, wow, I am in love with England, and that makes all the difference. Everyone loves to talk about the characters or narrative in a game's story, and while those are obviously extremely important parts of every story, I want to talk about the flaws with the pacing before I get into the narrative. Without the correct pacing, big moments in the story tend to lack tension. So what causes the pacing to be so bad in Assassin's Creed Valhalla? It's the approach the game took in telling 3 different plots within the story. We have Ivor looking for political alliances in England plot, the Order of the Ancients plot, and the Norse mythology plot with Odin and Loki. Now by no means is it a bad thing to have numerous plot lines in a story. The issue is if the plots are not handled carefully, the story can start to become confusing for the player to follow. Right from the start, the player is asked to keep track of all of the narrative threads, which can be extremely hard, especially in a game with so much history and lore like Assassin's Creed. But just because it is hard, it does not mean the game's story will automatically be bad. The writers just need to be careful not to have players lose interest in the story. So why doesn't it work in Assassin's Creed Valhalla? Well, the story lacks direction. Understanding the purpose of every individual storyline is crucial for keeping players interested. If we look at the alliances after the game is finished, we still don't know the purpose behind some of the arcs. Yeah, we know it gives the Vikings allies, but what's the deeper meaning? Well, we only can make assumptions on what it means for Ivor because we have some alliances in England. It's the same with any story. If we spend the story building alliances, then every arc needs to tie into the main story or else our time is wasted. With a game like Assassin's Creed 2, every sequence we complete brings us one step closer to the main goal. we know at some point Ezio will have the chance to get revenge for his family. That is what we call direction. If the player is completing an arc and has to wonder how it ties to the main story, they will lose interest. This is why the alliance arcs are so disliked. Most of our time spent building alliances does not help push forward the main story being told. In Valhalla, if you were to remove most of the alliance arcs, you would lose nothing in the rest of the story. That is what we call filler. Now, of course, it's easier to critique the story from the outside looking in, but it's hard to have sympathy for the developers when it's obvious that the story is as long as it is purely to beef up playtime. That being said, I do want to give some ideas on how I would change the story to improve the pacing. First, I want to talk about how I would fix the alliance storylines, and then I will explain how I would tie that into the rest of the plot. So starting with the alliance arcs, I'm removing a large portion of the filler arcs and changing them to side content. There's no reason we need 20 different arcs that all have similar gameplay and stories. I would only keep the select few that have relevance to the bigger story being told. Once I sorted out the alliance arcs, I would integrate the Order storyline completely with the England storyline so that they are one and the same. Every alliance built has a direct impact on the Order of the Ancient story, because at the end of the day, like I talked about in the commandment section, the center of an Assassin's Creed game is the conflict between the Assassins and Templars. Because we spend so much time making alliances for a reason we don't understand, we miss out on an interesting story of how the Order was destroyed and Templar created. When I reached the ending with Alfred, I was so confused and bored that I didn't even realize the game had ended. I had to search online because I thought I had missed some quest. But either way, cutting out a lot of the fluff and putting more focus on the Order, it allows the writers to build out the Order members in more depth. As it stands right now, most of the Order members are random NPCs off of our assassination list that don't have any real effect on the story. By making this switch, it can also give Ivor more meaning in hunting down the Order members. Right now, it feels like we're a sellsword for hire, and they just so happen to be called Order members. Once I fix those storylines, I'm making the Asgard story mandatory by shortening how many there are and when we complete them. It's a mockery that they are not technically mandatory when the ending with Basim and Modern Day would make no sense if you haven't played the missions. The Asgard missions should have been spaced out over the whole story, similar to the Modern Day sections. That way you can see the parallels happening in real time. So I want to clarify how my story would go to speed up the pacing. Ivor comes to England, looking for alliances to help protect her clan. This is when we would realize the Order has their hands on England. At the right times in the story, we would get flashbacks to Asgard to help show the parallel between the characters. This story will be completed with no side quests in about 30 hours. Right now, it sits at about 61 hours on average, so that's over half of the game taken out. Because the stories all branch from Ivor, they would be easy to keep track of, and really, it would be 2 plot lines instead of 3. Unfortunately, Assassin's Creed Valhalla tried to do too much, and because of that, it didn't work. But the pacing issue is not the only problem Valhalla has. So let's now talk about the narrative of the game and the main character Ivor. Even though there are other characters in the game, every narrative is centered around one character, Ivor. So no matter how good the rest of the characters and their stories are, it's Ivor and her story that matters the most. So what is the lesson of Ivor's story? I'd argue it's a story about honor. While Vikings are known to be cutthroats, they live by a strict code of ethics and honor. And all game long, the writers make it a focus to show that everything Ivor does in the name of honor. In the beginning of the game, we see a young Ivor as their village is attacked. Ivor, just a child, tries to pick up a sword and fight, but her father gives himself up in cowardice on the promise that the rest of the village be spared. After her father is killed, the attackers then go to kill the rest of the village. Ivor's friend Sigurd is able to help her escape before getting thrown off a cliff, where she then gets attacked by wolves, thus giving her the name Wolf-Kissed as well as a cool scar. Fast forward to Ivor as an adult, and she is still looking to bring back honor to her family by killing the man who attacked her village all those years ago. She then has a vision of Odin and another of Sigurd missing an arm. At this point, Sigurd returns from England with Basim and Hytham, who we know as members of the Hidden Ones. So coincidentally, they are in Norway to kill an Order of the Ancients member who also happens to be the man that killed Ivor's father. It's crazy how that one worked out, huh? At this point, Basim willingly gives Ivor a hidden blade and agrees to let Ivor help kill the Order member. After they kill the member, Sigurd's father pledges allegiance to King Harald to unite Norway under one ruler. Sigurd feels betrayed as he wanted to become king, so him and Ivor take the clan of Vikings to establish settlement in England. Up until this point, Ivor has been motivated by honor, whether it's been getting revenge or following Sigurd in his path. When they get to England, that's when things change. At this point, Ivor starts planning to build alliances to stake their claim and keep their clan safe. At the same time, Hytham asks for aid from Ivor to help take out Order of the Ancient members, following tip-offs from a poor fellow soldier of Christ. This is where Ivor's motivations start making no sense. A large majority of the middle game is spent killing people for what feels like no reason at all. Like I said earlier, Ivor is supposed to be an honorable Viking, but in reality her morals flip back and forth to whatever she is feeling in the moment. We spent so many hours with Ivor in the middle portion of the game. I would have liked to see more of the honor that we saw up in the beginning of the game. Finally, Ivor meets up with Sigurd and finds out him and Basim have found an Isu relic. At this point, Sigurd's delusion kicks in and he starts to believe he is a higher power. At this point, Sigurd is captured and tortured by the Order because they also believe him to be the reincarnation of Odin. Once Sigurd is rescued, Ivor accompanies him back to Norway when they find an Isu temple. Inside, they transport themselves into what they believe is Valhalla. When Ivor realizes the simulation is not real, they come back to the real world to find Basim waiting for them. Basim believes Sigurd to be Odin and they all get into a fight. During this, Ivor traps Basim in the simulation. Sigurd then renounces leadership of their clan to Ivor, who then returns to England. At this point, Ivor tracks down the remaining Order members before tracking down Alfred, who reveals himself to be the leader of the Order. At this point, Alfred tells Ivor of his plans to destroy the Order from the inside to recreate it what we know as the Templars. Ivor chooses to spare Alfred at this point, leaving him to create the Templars. So why doesn't this story work for Ivor? Well, the beginning of the story, we're told to believe that Ivor is an honorable and loyal Viking, as is displayed as the hero. But most of the time we're playing Ivor is spent pillaging and stealing loot. That's kind of the opposite of being a hero. So it's hard to connect to Ivor's story because she's a dishonorable character, so when the game tries to tell us she's actually the hero, it comes off flat. And over the course of 60 or so hours, she never changes the way she acts. Ivor talks about honor, but the decisions she makes are the exact opposite. For instance, she helps the Hidden Ones track down the Order for the whole game, just to let the leader go for no good reason. Where is the honor and loyalty in that? What drives a good character development is being able to see a change over the course of the game. The protagonist needs to learn from their decisions to help shape their outlook. So what would I change to help fix Ivor's character? Well, I would focus on the Assassin versus Templar plot, since I find this is the one that would shape Ivor's character the most. So here's how I would change the story to help fix Ivor's development while also helping fix the narrative. The story would start the same, but after King Harald assumes the throne, Sigurd's clan would be voted out of the alliance by the king because of the scarcity of resources. This forces the clan's hand to move to England to make a new home for themselves. Right from the start, I'd feel more empathy for Ivor and Sigurd because it wasn't their choice to be voted out. And now, when the Raven clan is pillaging England, it feels much more out of desperation to survive. So it makes Ivor's reasoning a lot more personable than it currently is. In this story, Hytham can still use Ivor to help with the Order in England because of her skill set. But Hytham would try and talk Ivor out of her current path, telling her there is a better way to do things. So now this causes internal struggle with Ivor. She's in a new land, trying to help her clan survive, but she starts to question her actions. Is this life I'm living truly the right way to do things, or should I start questioning the Viking ways? As the story progresses, we would see this conflict in Eivor, having questioned the reason for battle, glory, and everything else she stands for. Over the course of the story, this could be shown through different cutscenes or different moments where Eivor comes to her senses. Eivor would be reflecting more on her actions, which as a player allows us to root for her. But this is where it would get interesting. As we track down King Alfred and destroy the Order, there would be a negative force pushing against Eivor as well. This is where we would choose to come to the climax of the story. Eivor would either choose to follow the ways of the Creed or her life as a Viking. I'm going to talk about both of the different choices and which one I prefer. The hero way would have Eivor realizing she has now been living in the wrong, similar to that of Edward Kenway. She would then confront King Alfred, but he would escape as she comes to finish the job, which would still allow him to create the Templars. At this point, it doesn't really matter whether she actually joins the Hidden Ones or not. We know she stands firmly on their side. At the end of the story, we see that transition of Eivor as a Viking with no morals to someone who cares about boundaries and finding the difference between right or wrong. But my personal favorite idea would have Eivor staying in her Viking ways and turning on the Hidden Ones. She would turn on Hytham and the Hidden Ones, joining Alfred on the quest to create the Templars. After all, this game is supposed to be the origin story of how Templars were created. I think it would be really cool if we were rooting for Eivor this whole story, assuming we're the hero, just to realize we have been playing the villain. Now I can touch on the modern day or the mythology of Asgard or even characters like Sigurd and Basim, but I don't find that it really matters too much in the overall story being told. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a game that focuses on the story of Eivor and her quest to conquer England. And I guess she helps out the Hidden Ones when convenient, but in all seriousness, I do feel like this game can be a lesson for Ubisoft. There is baggage when you use a popular IP to help sell games. If you don't want to be held back by the ideas of Assassins versus Templars, then don't use the title Assassin's Creed. If you are going to use the title, then you owe it to the fans of the series to at least try and deliver a story that they can be proud of. Not everyone is going to like every game, and there is a beauty to that. Over time, there are games fans learn to love, but I don't see Assassin's Creed Valhalla being that game. So is Assassin's Creed Valhalla the mockery of the franchise that you remember, or is it better than you thought? Let me know your thoughts below. If you enjoy the content, make sure to drop a like, and I'll see you next time.